The morning sun filtered through the tall, clear windows of the Grand Municipal Hall of Justice, casting long, warm beams of light across the polished wooden benches of the gallery. There was a unique, almost reassuring rhythm to the room before the daily proceedings began, a gentle symphony composed of the rustling of legal documents, the quiet murmuring of clerks, and the steady, rhythmic footsteps of the bailiff organizing the tables. This courtroom was not merely a place of legal decrees. It was a grand theater of human life, where the intricate tangles of family support, broken promises, and neighborhood disagreements were laid bare before the sharp, discerning eyes of truth. On this particular day, the air carried an atmosphere of anticipation, a sense that beneath the standard disputes lay profound lessons about responsibility, the enduring power of generational love, and the light-hearted comedy of human nature. In the front row of the spectators' area sat Mary Grace Casey, her hands resting quietly on her lap as she reflected upon the long, winding journey that had brought her to this moment. Her mind wandered back to the vast corridor of time, tracing the memories to the year 2000, a period filled with youthful optimism when she had exchanged marriage vows with Roderick Casey. Together, they had embarked on the grand adventure of parenthood, bringing two beautiful boys into the world, young men who were now 20 years old and 17 years old respectively. However, the bright hopes of those early years had gradually dissolved, leading to a quiet separation that lasted for nearly 2 years before their marriage was officially dissolved in the year 2014. Since that turning point, Mary Grace had navigated the complex challenges of single motherhood, managing the endless schedules, the growing appetites, and the unpredictable expenses of two active boys. The final divorce decree had established a combined monthly child support obligation of $600 for both children, an amount intended to provide a financial foundation until each son reached the milestone age of 18. To Mary Grace, that support was a vital contribution, but to Roderick, it was a ledger to be closed at the absolute earliest opportunity. The underlying tension reached its peak on the exact morning their eldest son celebrated his 18th birthday. Before the sun had even fully cleared the horizon, Roderick had contacted the court to terminate his financial support obligation for that child, fulfilling the precise letter of the legal decree while instantly having his monthly contribution. 2 years had passed since that morning, and the older boy, now a young man of 20, had found his footing in the professional world, securing a position as a full-time manager at a local fitness establishment. He continued to reside at home with his mother, earning a modest wage of $9.98 an hour, which amounted to approximately $600 every 2 weeks. Although he worked diligently, his limited income left very little room for the sudden, costly emergencies of adult life, such as the mechanical failures of an aging automobile or the painful necessity of extensive oral surgery. When the heavy oak doors of the rear of the courtroom swung open, the murmuring in the gallery ceased instantly. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice echoing with absolute authority as he commanded everyone to rise and bring the court to order. Judge Judy Justice entered the room with swift, purposeful stride, her black robe flowing behind her as she took her seat at the elevated bench. She possessed an unmistakable aura of pragmatism, a woman who had spent decades peering through the fog of human exaggeration to discover the solid ground of reality. She adjusted her spectacles, greeted the room with a firm nod, and called case number 3049, Casey versus Casey. Mrs. Casey and Mr. Casey stepped forward to their respective wooden podiums, the emotional distance between them palpable across the short physical span of the floor. Judge Justice looked down at the complaint, her eyes scanning the details with practiced efficiency. She noted that the plaintiff was seeking reimbursement for outstanding medical bills and automotive repairs associated with their adult son. Mr. Casey stood with his arms tightly crossed, a posture of immediate defense, asserting that he fulfilled every legal obligation required of him by the state. He argued that his child support duties for the eldest boy had concluded the very moment the young man reached adulthood, and that he had never agreed to assume any additional financial burdens. With sharp, methodical questions, the judge began to establish the timeline of the dispute. She noted that the older boy was working full-time and living at home completely rent-free, a detail that immediately raised her judicial eyebrows. Judge Justice questioned why an independent, employed young adult would require his father to cover basic expenses like car repairs, which had occurred on March 17th and May 16th of the year 2023. Mrs. Casey countered that her son simply did not earn enough to survive the high cost of living, explaining that his wages were spent almost entirely on gasoline and groceries for the collective household. When the judge expressed skepticism that a young man earning $600 every 2 weeks was purchasing groceries for the entire family, Mrs. Casey maintained her stance, though her confidence began to waver under the court's intense scrutiny. The core of Mrs. Casey's argument rested upon a purported oral contract, an agreement she claimed was formed during a period of unexpected benevolence. In October of the year 2022, Roderick had fallen upon difficult financial times, finding himself without a stable place to live. Exhibiting a spirit of compassion and a hope for family harmony, Mary Grace had allowed her former husband to temporarily move into her home, granting him sanctuary on her living room couch until he could regain his financial footing. It was during this period of cohabitation that Mary Grace claimed to have established the agreement. She recalled telling him that while she was willing to help him in his hour of need, he had an enduring obligation to help her with the boys, specifically highlighting that their oldest son would soon require his wisdom teeth to be extracted. According to her testimony, Roderick had nodded and given his verbal assent. Judge Justice shook her head, her voice firm and educational as she dismantled the legal validity of the claim. She explained to the parties that an agreement to simply help out is completely void for vagueness under the law. For an enforceable contract to exist, there must be specific, definite terms. A vague promise to offer assistance could mean $10, $20, or $100, but it could not legally encompass an unknown, unpredictable future liability, such as a multi-thousand-dollar dental procedure or spontaneous automotive repairs that neither party could have anticipated back in October. The narrative took a dramatic and unexpected turn when the discussion shifted to the actual payment of the dental bill, which had been incurred on May 15th of the year 2023. Mrs. Casey claimed that because Roderick refused to take her direct phone calls, she routinely communicated with him through his mother. She asserted that she had relayed the final figure of the dental bill to the grandmother, who promised to inform her son, and that Roderick had subsequently called her to agree to cover the cost. Mr. Casey vehemently denied this, stating clearly that no such phone call had ever taken place. It was at this moment that a quiet, dignified woman rose from the spectator benches at the rear of the courtroom. She stepped forward with grace, her expression a mixture of gentle sorrow and profound maternal devotion. This was the elder Mrs. Casey, the grandmother of the children and the mother of the defendant. When asked by the court if she recalled the plaintiff calling about the dental bill, the grandmother spoke with absolute clarity and honesty. She remembered the event perfectly, not because she had passed a message to her son, but because she had paid the entire $2,300 bill herself. She had physically accompanied her grandson to the orthodontist, witnessed the extraction of his wisdom teeth, paid the medical staff directly with her own funds, and safely escorted the young man back to his home. The revelation hung heavily in the air, shifting the entire energy of the courtroom. Mrs. Casey attempted to pivot her argument, claiming that she was actually suing for the minor associated costs, such as prescriptions and insurance co-payments, and that she intended to repay the grandmother eventually. However, her credibility had been deeply compromised. In a beautiful display of judicial insight, Judge Justice expressed a profound disappointment in the plaintiff's lack of candor. She pointed out that if Mrs. Casey had been completely truthful from the beginning, she would have acknowledged that the primary dental bill had already been graciously settled by the grandmother. The judge officially dismissed the case, recognizing that the grandmother had gone far beyond any legal requirement, voluntarily contributing well over $100,000 since the year 2014 to ensure her grandchildren were properly supported. As the parties were excused, the grandmother received the quiet admiration of everyone in the room, standing as a shining example of unconditional love, generosity, and true family values. Following a brief intermission that allowed the room to reset its emotional gravity, the legal clerks organized a fresh set of documents, and the bailiff took a deep breath, scanning the next group of litigants waiting at the threshold. This second matter of the day promised an entirely different exploration of human relationships, shifting the focus from the long-term bonds of a broken family to brief, volatile friction of temporary roommates living in a bustling metropolitan environment. The bailiff stepped forward once more, his voice ringing out clearly through the hall as he called case number 3052, Jessup versus Thomas, with these words: Two young women walked down the central aisle, each projecting a distinct sense of righteous indignation. The plaintiff, Poopy Jessup, walked with deliberate, theatrical stride, her posture conveying a deep sense of perceived injury. The defendant, Tabitha Thomas, moved with an air of exhausted exasperation, clearly eager to bring a definitive end to a dispute that had lingered over her life like a dark cloud for more than a year. Judge Justice looked down from her bench, assessing the paperwork before her. The claim was substantial, a demand for $10,000 encompassing medical bills, an alleged false eviction, and significant emotional distress. The judge turned her attention to Miss Jessup, inquiring about the origins of their acquaintance and the circumstances that had led them to share a living space. Miss Jessup explained that in the autumn of the year 2022, she found herself in a precarious situation, lacking a stable and permanent place to reside. She had been employed at a highly luxurious fitness facility known as High Mat, a place where affluent clients exercise amidst sleek glass walls and premium amenities. It was within this environment of health and luxury that she met Tabitha Thomas, a fellow employee. Upon discovering that Miss Thomas had an available room for rent in her apartment, Miss Jessup went to inspect the property at the beginning of November. Finding the accommodation suitable, she decided to take the room and moved her belongings into the apartment that very month. The financial arrangement was casual. She paid her first official month of rent for December, but there was never a written lease signed between the two women. Miss Jessup claimed that the defendant had instructed her not to worry about formal paperwork, an assertion that immediately signaled a lack of structural clarity to the court. The tenancy, however, was exceptionally short-lived. By December 31st, a mere 1 month after her arrival, Miss Jessup had completely moved out of the apartment. She had lived there for 31 days, paid rent for exactly 1 month, and possessed no enduring legal contract tying her to the property. Yet, she was claiming a false eviction and demanding thousands of dollars for emotional suffering. Judge Justice, with her characteristic efficiency, immediately redirected the focus of the hearing away from the grandiosity of the emotional distress claims and zeroed in on the physical catalyst of the entire dispute, an English Golden Retriever Terrier mix belonging to Miss Thomas. According to Miss Jessup's testimony, the fateful incident occurred on the afternoon of December 9th. She had been confined to her rented room, participating in an important online Zoom video conference with her university professor. While she was engaged in this academic discussion, the third roommate residing in the apartment entered the space, accompanied by the energetic young canine. Miss Jessup alleged that without warning, the large dog bounded toward her, jumped onto her person, and bit her severely on the arm and leg, leaving her bleeding, terrified, and desperate to escape the room. She claimed the pain was immense and presented her leg to court, pointing to what Sheisher described as enduring scars. The judge examined the medical documentation submitted by the plaintiff, noting a significant discrepancy in the timeline. Although the incident was said to have occurred on December 9th, Miss Jessup did not seek medical attention at an urgent care facility until nearly a week later. The medical report indicated that the patient presented with a chief complaint of a bite wound on the left upper extremity and left elbow, along with minor scratches. There was absolutely no mention of infection, swelling, severe inflammation, or any complications that would typically warrant an emergency medical visit 7 days after fact. When questioned about this delay, Miss Jessup explained that she lacked health insurance and was deeply terrified of the potential financial burden of medical bills. She had secretly hoped that Miss Thomas, as the owner of the dog, would voluntarily step forward and offer to cover any health care costs. But when no such offer materialized, her anxiety for her own well-being finally drove her to the clinic. The total cost of the medical treatment was a modest $80. To gain a complete understanding of the event, Judge Justice turned to Miss Thomas, requesting her perspective on the canine encounter. Miss Thomas painted a vastly different picture, one rooted in everyday animal behavior rather than predatory aggression. She explained that her dog was a friendly, social creature who merely wished to sniff the new resident, especially since Miss Jessup had only been living in the household for less than 2 weeks. However, Miss Jessup harbored a deep, unvoiced fear of dogs, a detail she omitted when she first applied to rent a room. Every time the animal approached her to offer a standard canine greeting, she would react with visible panic, physically pushing him away with force. On the afternoon in question, When the dog entered the room, Miss Jessup began to scream hysterically and pushed the animal away. In the ensuing chaos of movement and noise, the dog's nails had inadvertently struck her leg and arm as he was pulled back. Miss Thomas testified that immediately following the commotion, she and the other roommate had offered direct assistance, asking Miss Jessup if she required medical aid or wished to visit a doctor. Miss Jessup had declined all offers of help. Furthermore, the defense revealed that within an hour of the incident, the plaintiff had taken a thorough shower, styled her hair, dressed herself elegantly in a fine outfit, and departed the apartment to attend a high-profile public gathering. Through social media records, it was revealed that Miss Jessup had spent that very evening at the festive Los Angeles Christmas parade, actively conducting interviews with various celebrities for her Instagram account. She had been seen smiling, radiant, and fully engaged in the glamorous holiday event, a reality that stood in stark contrast to her claims of debilitating physical trauma and profound emotional ruin. Judge Justice looked at the photographs provided by the plaintiff, observing that the marks on her leg resembled 3 small, superficial scratches rather than a vicious animal bite, and that the discoloration appeared consistent with an older bruise. The judge concluded that while the dog had undoubtedly made physical contact and caused minor scratches that resulted in an $80 medical bill, the grand demand for $10,000 was an exercise in excessive human drama and an unwarranted financial grab. With absolute finality, the judge delivered her ruling. She stated that a person cannot reasonably expect to remain in a household where they harbor a fundamental fear of a resident pet, validating the common-sense reality that the living arrangement was entirely incompatible. She awarded the plaintiff exactly $80 to reimburse the cost of the urgent care visit, completely denying all claims for false eviction and emotional distress. As the court adjourned, Miss Thomas expressed an immense sense of relief and gratitude, glad to finally be free from a year of legal pursuit. The proceedings served as a vivid demonstration of the court's vital role in contemporary society, a place where genuine, provable damages are fairly compensated, but where theatrical exaggeration and disingenuous claims are swiftly and justly tempered by the steady hand of common sense. The litigants walked out into the afternoon air, leaving the grand theater of the courtroom ready for the next chapter of human stories, filled with the enduring light of truth and wholesome reality.